Hello folks, and welcome to the second and final part of this road trip around the coastline of Cornwall, here in the UK. In the last episode we explored the south coast, heading from east to west and all the way to Land's End. We ended up in Connor Downs, a small village 20 minutes east of St Ives, and that's where this part of the trip begins. If you missed the last episode and it's of interest to you, then hit the tab in the top right hand corner. In this episode we begin in Connor Downs and make our way east until we leave Cornwall and into Devon. So, let's begin. I woke up to a wet and windy morning. The temptation to stay indoors and have a day off walking did enter my mind, but only for a few seconds. I got my bag together and hit the coast. I took a 7-minute drive to Godrevy, the National Trust nature reserve here. I'd noticed a loop walk on the map, so I decided on doing that. And it also passed by something that I'd been recommended to visit while I'm here. The walk began at the beach and headed through the sand dunes. Once I left the beach, the climb slowly began up the high cliffs. The wind was fresh and strong, but the rain had stopped at least. Personally, I love walking along the coast in these conditions. It's so refreshing, and as they say, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. As I was walking along, I always had Godrevy Lighthouse to my left out at sea. I bet that would have some stories to tell if it could speak. I continued to walk on, and then I arrived at the place that I'd been recommended to visit. Or should I say who I got recommended to visit. It's the famous seal colony here at the reserve. They gather at the bottom of the steep cliffs on this small, stony beach. Some were chilling, some were swimming, some just seemed to be wriggling around for what reason, I don't know. Even though they were all the way down there, you could still smell them from up here. They were fairly potent, I'll give them that. I continued along the path, and as I reached another viewpoint of the seals, I noticed there was another group of seals in a stony cove. It was so nice to see a large colony like this feel safe while we observed from above. I eventually dropped back down to where I began the walk and decided that I'd continue along the coastline in the opposite direction for a while, or at least until the rain reached us that was visible in the distance. Again, there were some nice views along the way, with the lighthouse still in view. As promised, the rain came in, so I headed back to the car, passing by this cute little cafe along the way. Even though I'd visited St Ives before, I thought it'd be rude not to pay it another visit as I was so close. The last time I was here, I was about 11 years old. It was the middle of the summer and packed to the rafters with tourists. This time couldn't have been any different. It was the middle of winter, it was cold, it was grey, and hardly a tourist in sight. This is more like it. There really is something to be said for travelling out of season. Yes, the weather might not be as warm as you'd like, but personally I think that's a fair trade-off for next to zero tourists. While I was here, I took a walk along the harbour. Once again, like the other coastal towns I'd visited on this trip, the fishing culture here is huge. While walking through all of the lobster pots and fishing paraphernalia, I couldn't help imagine how this place must have been back in the day. Bustling with fishermen throughout the day, and in the dark of the night you'd have the pirates sneaking in with their rum and whatever else they used to import in on the sly. In the evenings I had dinner at the same pub that I went to the night before. It was just down the road and did great food, very convenient. While I was there, I got the map out and chose at random a place to call home for the next 2 nights, and that place was called Stib. There was absolutely nothing in Stib, but I found a good priced room on Airbnb, and there were a few places of interest to visit along the drive there. Quite often the location of my accommodation isn't that important. I just pick somewhere a little further along from where I'm currently at and find places of interest to visit on the way there. I generally find it's a good way of doing things. It works for me. After a bit of breakfast and a coffee, I quickly made a packed lunch and left Stib. I headed to the first stop of the day, Perranporth. As usual, I'd spotted a little coastal walk there, and I got recommended by a local that I should walk along the cliffs one way and drop down onto the beach and return along the beach. So that's exactly what I did. On the way to the cliffs, you pass a lovely restaurant on the beach. I almost felt like I was back in Mexico, except for the freezing cold wind. It might have been cold, but it was bright with blue skies, and I don't mind a northeasterly wind in my locks from time to time. The views from the cliffs were stunning. They showed off the vastness and beauty of this lengthy strip of golden sand. As planned, I dropped down onto the beach. Along the way, it was evident how this beach was enjoyed by many dogs. I also spotted these volunteers cleaning the beach of any unwanted debris. Very nice. And to be fair, that's one thing I had noticed on the many beaches that I had visited on this trip. They were very clean and tidy. The people down here clearly have respect for their surroundings. On the most westerly point of this beach, there's a huge rock that's known as Chapel Rock. And on this rock, there is a natural swimming pool. It didn't look too inviting on this day, but in the summer it's a different kettle of fish. Here's a photo off Google to help explain what I mean. Beautiful, right? After enjoying a locally made coffee, I headed to stop number 2, the famous surfing spot, Newquay. I parked up near Fistral beach. Instantly I noticed how much more aggressive the ocean was here. And the same could be said for the wind strength. It was clear why surfing is huge here, but ironically, when I was here, there wasn't a surfer in sight. Maybe the waves were too rough, because to be fair, it was blowing a hoolie and the waves were bouncing off the shoreline. It was so refreshing to have that ocean spray whip me in the face. After a short walk, I headed back to the car and parked up a little further along the coast to eat my lunch. While I sat there, I noticed what looked like a small peninsula on the other side of Fistral beach. I got the map out and had a look what it was called. Towan Headland. I don't know why, but I had a sudden urge to park up there and walk to the end of it, so that's what I did. It was a great little walk, passing by this little bridge as the rough sea crashed against the rocks and swept underneath my feet with sheer aggression. To be honest, it was a little scary. While I was stood there watching, an elderly chap told me that the best was yet to come, and I should definitely walk to the end of the headland to see the grand finale. He'd got me curious. So with that being said, I continued along the path, and I'm glad I did. This huge blowhole was showing off and putting on a spectacular show. I've seen blowholes before, but never to this extent. I'm guessing the rough seas and strong winds helped. I love coming across random, unexpected things like this. The beauty of not making a plan. I had one more place that I wanted to visit before it went dark, and it was a race against time. I had an hour's drive eastbound to get there, but I've just made it before darkness. Welcome to Port Isaac. If you're from the UK and watch TV, you might recognise this cute little fishing village with the cutest little port. It's used in the TV series Doc Martin. I'm not a TV watcher, but I am familiar with this show. I did a quick Google search to find out the most popular buildings that were used in the show, purely for your benefit, of course. I then made my way to the accommodation for the evening. I grabbed some dinner on the way at a local pub and got the map out to scout out somewhere I should explore tomorrow. There were a few options, and as I can be a little indecisive sometimes, I asked the local guys for suggestions. They recommended 2 places, Boscastle and Tintagel. 2 places nearby one another and about half an hour's drive from here. Perfect. That was the next morning sorted. Again, I woke up to a very wet and windy morning. I wouldn't be lying if I said I wasn't tempted to stay indoors and have a day of rest after 12 solid days of driving and hiking around this beautiful coastline. The weather had been quite kind to me up until now. But then the idea of exploring Boscastle and Tintagel got the better of me. Plus I really do enjoy a hike in the wind and rain, especially along a dramatic coastline. There's not much to see here really, but in places like this, it's more about appreciating the character of the villages, thinking how it must have been living here back in the day. This was to be by far the wettest and windiest day of the trip. And the worst of the weather seemed to wait until I got to the highest point of the cliffs here. But you know what? I loved it. It makes you feel so alive being out in the harsh elements and listening to the huge waves crashing below. Even though I had my waterproofs on, I quickly learned that they weren't as waterproof as I'd once thought. Soaked to the bone, I headed back to the car and headed to Tintagel. The first thing I did in Tintagel was find somewhere to eat, drink and get dry. Well, drier. I picked a place at random and ordered myself a prawn cocktail baguette and a pint of the locally brewed offshore lager. Lovely. There wasn't much to the village in all honesty, but there were some pretty interesting ruins of a castle here that has an interesting quote, unquote, fact. Apparently this was the birthplace of King Arthur. Unfortunately, the castle was closed, but you could still walk around some of the ruins which offered some lovely views of the cliffs. As the sun dropped, I headed back to my accommodation for a much needed shower. The place that I chose to stay here in Stib happened to be run by a nutritionist, and she offered a lovely menu for a reasonable price. So that evening I decided to go for that, and it was delicious. Just what the doctor ordered after having a day of fighting the elements. After dinner, I had a little look at what to do and where to stay tomorrow night for my final night. Stib is right on the Cornwall and Devon border. I would be leaving the county of Cornwall tomorrow and heading into Devon. During a previous Google search, I'd come across a waterfall that looked quite interesting called Speaks Mill Mouth, and I knew it was in this area somewhere. I'd also been suggested by my Airbnb hosts of a little village that I shouldn't miss out on along the way too, called Clovelly. That was the next day sorted. I randomly chose a place called Ilfracombe as my place to stay for the sole reason that it was an hour's drive east of Clovelly and in the right direction that I was going to go home the following day. A good strategic move. Today the weather was much better. A little windy still, but the skies were blue and the air was fresh, perfect for a hike along the coast. I parked up at the nearby car park and begun the hour-long hike to the waterfall. The scenes along the way were just stunning. The rock formations that made up the seabed below were unlike anything I'd seen along the rest of this coastline. The rugged little hills that stand tall right on the cliff edges. This area is definitely more hilly than what I'd seen in Cornwall. It's amazing what a difference a little hop, skip and jump into another county does. It's like the accents here in the UK, they almost change from town to town. I arrived at what I thought was Speaks Mill Mouth waterfall, but no, this was just a random waterfall along the way. What a lovely little surprise. Eventually, the main event came into view. A stunning waterfall that splits into 2 falls and eventually ends up in the rough oceans below. There's something about waterfalls by the ocean like this that just mesmerises me. I headed back to the car, but not before I had the urge to climb one of these amazing hills that had clearly been created for climbing. A 20-minute drive east got me to our next stop, Clovelly. This little old village is famous for its steep cobbled street that leads down to the smallest harbour I'd witnessed on this trip. My guess is that it's pretty rare to walk down this whole street without passing by another person, but that's exactly what happened on this trip. So, ladies and gents, let me take you down the entirety of this high street without another soul in sight. Enjoy! After 10 minutes, these people left and I had the whole harbour to myself. The beauty of travelling out of season. I can imagine in the height of summer that this place is bustling with tourists, but I sat here happy with the tranquility and solitude as I sipped the cold beer in the cold harbour. Back in the day, they used to use donkeys as transport to get up and down these hills. Another old tradition, and still get used to this day, are man-powered sledges for the ease of transporting goods, just like what these guys are doing here. I trundled back up the steep hill, but this time it was a little different. They had turned on the Christmas street lights, and these simple lights made this place picture perfect. It had postcard written all over it. By the time I'd reached Ilfracombe, it was dark. The accommodation I'd chosen this time was cheap and cheerful. All I needed was a bed for the night, so this place fitted the bill nicely. Sometimes I choose these kind of places to keep the costs down, but not only for that. Sometimes you meet the most interesting people with the least quote-unquote wealth. And this was one of those moments. The 81-year-old man that I rented the room from was a right character, and it reinforced once again never to judge a book by its cover. And he had a lovely little dog too, which is always a bonus. I'd just like to say quickly that all COVID safety guidelines and rules given by AirBnb were adhered to when I was staying in all of the Airbnbs on this trip. At the time of this trip, it was December 2020, and Cornwall was the only Tier 1 county on mainland UK, meaning it was the most relaxed county in terms of movement and businesses being able to trade more freely during the pandemic. In the evening, I took a walk down to Ilfracombe Harbour and realised that it's actually pretty nice. Another cute little harbour with many little eateries and pubs open. One thing Ilfracombe is famous for is the 65-foot stainless steel and bronze sculpture called Verity that was created by Damien Hirst. It was brought here in 2012 and is on loan to the town for 20 years. After a bite to eat, I headed back to my room for the night and got myself an early night, ready for one last walk along this coastline in the morning before driving back to North Wales. I've been told by my host that on a clear day you can see the coast of South Wales from here. It's about 25 miles north across the Bristol Channel. So I got my map out and picked out a random place along the coast. I chose a small headland just outside a village called Linton. After a 45-minute walk, I got to the end of the headland and, true to his word, there was the coastline of South Wales in the far distance. I could just make out the cliffs near Porthcawl. I was so tempted to take a slow drive home through South Wales and into Pembrokeshire and up to North Wales, but with the ever-changing rules with the pandemic at the time, I thought the sensible thing to do was to head straight home. Plus, I know myself, I would have spent another 2 weeks at least admiring the beauty of my own country. Oh well, there's always a next time, and a good excuse to document that when the time comes. So there you go. That was my unexpected and unplanned 2-week road trip around Cornwall and a touch of Devon. I hope you've enjoyed the adventure, and I hope you've enjoyed the little insight into how I like to travel around when I'm doing things solo. If you missed the first episode of the trip, I'll leave the link in the description box below, and please let me know in the comments if you've been to this part of the world and if you have any favourite places here. I'm always looking for new places to visit. Take care of yourselves, folks, and until next time, peace.